in here. Today we are going to make a kind of savory butternut squash soup with some stuffed naan and some banana bars. So let's start out with our banana bars because we want them to kind of sufficiently cool before we put our cream cheese frosting on them. So we're going to start off with 3 pretty ripe bananas here. Now, typically I would say even blacker would be better, but these are got a good amount of ripeness to them. And we're going to kind of mash them up with half a cup of brown sugar and a cup of regular sugar. So it'll be a nice kind of sweet base to these bars. And then we'll add in some sour cream and some soft butter and eggs and all those delicious things to make the base for these. So let me get this tossed into the trash. And then we can get this part going here. So we've got our 3 pretty ripe bananas. We're going to add in a half a cup of brown sugar. And make sure you have it firmly packed so that you have a good accurate measurement for it. And then I always get a little bit of crumbs on me for that. And then 1 whole cup of granulated sugar. So the mixture of that brown sugar and the granulated sugar really makes it like and very nice and lovely sweetness, but not too pulling over to the rich part of that brown sugar one. So just is really lovely. And then 1 whole cup of granulated sugar. And then I'm just going to use my hand mixer for this. And we are going to mix the sugars into the bananas until we've got kind of like a banana-y paste going on here. And I'm using my hand mixers today because I'm actually using softened butter versus melted butter, which means I'm going to want to kind of cream it into the base for everything. Let's start with our bananas first. We'll get these guys working together. Now, once that banana juices and the sugar start to meet, we kind of get a nice little soupy base for it. But these bars are a classic of mine, one of my favorites. So I've been working on our cookbook and we've been going through the different recipes and kind of was editing and working on this page for it. And I'll have to say, I made these probably 100 times in the summer of 2008. I spent time with my sister and watching her little kids. And it was, in the middle of college. And these are really common in the Midwest. We're going to use 2 eggs in here. And we just love them. And I felt like we made them every week. That entire summer, it was like as soon as the bars were gone, we made a new batch of them. And they're just so good. We've got our 2 eggs here. And then we're going to add in a half a cup of soft butter. So just room temperature butter here. So we're going to cream that egg and that butter into our mixture here. I'm just going to get this little piece of butter off my wrapper. To waste not, want not. And to make this little base. But it's a simple, almost like a slightly sweeter banana bread base with this cream cheese frosting. And it is so good. Here. We're getting it. Get that butter mixed in there. And I give just a nice slight higher base for it. There. Okay. Now we are going to add in a cup of sour cream. So that's going to help keep these really moist between the bananas and the sour cream and the butter. They're just so good. I'm going down to, I have lots of little bits of sour cream from everything. So we're going to kind of use all of these to get to our cup of sour cream. Grab a spoon. It's funny when I get down to, that's always like my kids are like, oh, I could use up the last, 1/4 of a cup of something, or I could open up a new pack. And they always opt to open up a new pack. So let's get to our there. So we've got part of this cup filled up with our sour cream. We've got a good amount to get us there. And then let's use this little guy up. squeeze this in. But a whole cup of sour cream. And that kind of adds a nice little moisture to this cake. And again, it just makes it absolutely wonderful. There we go. I think we're going to perfectly make it out to around a whole cup between my 3 little miscellaneous containers here. See, perfectly. Let me get these tossed and then we will add them in. So we've got our sour cream here. We're going to add it into the base of our thing. 1 whole cup. Here we go. Slide this over here. We're going to mix that in. That sour cream, again, is going to make this cake so moist and just really great texture to it. Let's get that mixed in here. And then we'll add in some salt, vanilla, and baking soda for the base of this. And then our flour. And that is really all you need for this cake. For the base part. Simple, but delicious. Okay, we're going to add in a teaspoon of baking soda. And we're going to add in a teaspoon of salt. And a whole tablespoon of vanilla extract. And that's where you're going to get this nice vanilla flavor in this base for it. We'll use a little bit more vanilla too when we're making our frosting as well. Mix them in, and then we'll add in 2 cups of flour, and we'll mix until it's just combined. But we want to first make sure that baking soda gets mixed all the way around. But between the eggs and the baking soda, that's what's going to give this a nice little rise. And then we're going to add in 2 cups of flour. Just set that right here. We're just going to use an all-purpose flour for this, and we'll mix it in for it. Oh, looks like I must have used my cup the other day for something. New scoop. So 1 cup. 2 cups. Set this over here, and then we'll mix this in. And again, you're going to mix it until it's just barely mixed together. Again, you don't want to over mix because you want a fluffier banana kind of bar base versus a dense one. Now, with it being soft butter, you don't have to worry too much about it being over mixed. But these are going to be so delicious. Okay. Pretty good here. You're going to have some nice chunks from the bananas in here. And then I'm going to just get a spatula in just a second here. I'm going to just set these to the side. Well, I'll rinse them real quick because we're actually going to be using these for our frosting as well. Because we're making nice, rich frosting. I always say, I'm like, I should just buy a second set of beaters because there's so many times where I need them both. Okay. Let's get our spatula here. And we'll do a good mix around. Just to make sure we have no clumps of flour. Okay, now this is a little bit different. I'm actually going to be baking it on a 9 by 13 inch sheet pan here. You could also do it in a like a 9 by 13 inch, like a baking sheet. That's a press and seal. I don't need that. I need parchment paper. I always do it in here because it gives you a little bit more more heat to it. Make sure your parchment paper is ample enough to go out the sides because we'll lift it out like that way and then it can kind of cool off here. So this is a half sheet pan. So in there, but you can also do it in a 9 by 13 inch if you want to. But I find that these work the best this way. and I'll bake up. We're going to kind of spoon it out on here. We'll spread it out for it because these bars, you don't want them to be too thick because you want them to cook up faster. There we go. Get all of this goodness in here. And then we're going to spread this out with our spatula. And these are going to be our nice things. So they'll kind of puff up around like twice this thickness of them. But I find that I don't like them super thin. You know, sometimes people will make them in a whole sheet pan and then you have a really thin, almost like one of those like kind of roll up cakes. I like mine a little bit thicker. So I do mine in a half sheet pan. And that way I get a little bit more frosting for every bar, but it's really, you know, it just means you get a thick layer on top. Okay. We've got ours just about here. And then we're going to go pop this in the oven. This bakes up at about 350 for about 25 minutes. And again, that's because we have it spread out a good fair amount for it. But it's slightly sweeter than banana bread, but still all of that rich banana flavor in this bars. Okay. I'm going to set my timer for 25 minutes. And while that's going, we will work on, I'm going to whip up my naan and we'll make our soup.
Yeah, question. Where can you find parchment paper?
Parchment paper you can get at your local grocery store. It's going to be in the same aisle as like your aluminum foil, saran wrap. You just kind of have to look on there. But that's where you can kind of get it. Sometimes you get it white, sometimes it's brown. You know, there's different variations. Brown parchment paper allows you to cook a little bit higher on temperatures than a kind of the white ones. But that I've been able to find there. You can also get it on Amazon or Target or pretty much anywhere that sells kind of cooking stuff. Let's get our naan whipped up. That way our dough will have a chance to hydrate and then we can get it there. I'm going to grab I'll grab a little bit. We're going to use a little bit of both of Jacques and Gus Gus here. And let me grab a measuring cup because I need about a cup of our discard. So naan is this is a sourdough naan, but it is a great thing to use when you have a lot of discard that you need to get rid of. So it's kind of perfect for if you make a lot of sourdough bread. So we're going to use a whole cup. So I'm going to use a little bit from Gus Gus, and then I'm going to do a little bit from Jacques, and that way I can feed these guys up and we can make some more sourdough. I've got 2 loaves proofed up, ready to bake up in my fridge. I'm going to bake one up tonight once I figure out exactly what we're doing for dinner, which is always a guess. But when I go to feed them, I like my levels to be down low because sourdough, once you feed it, your starter is active. It will kind of double in size at the final after it's fed. And so if it's too high up in your jar, it will pop out. It will pop your top off. And I've done that many times. And sourdough starter is like concrete. It is impossible to get off once it's dried out. Okay, let's put in, we've got a whole cup of our sourdough discard going in here for it. And you can also use active starter that you fed up. Either work great for this recipe because we're not really using it for the leavening, but more for the nice kind of flavor base for it. We're going to add in 6 tablespoons of water, which is the same as 90 milliliters. So whenever I'm doing bigger measurements, I use the milliliters because it's just easier. We're going to do 1/4 cup of olive oil because we're going to be cooking this on a dry skillet. And so you want that good amount of fat in there to kind of crisp it up. I've never had it do it like that. Oh, I think that's so you can get a good tight seal on it. Okay, let's get our olive oil here, 1/4 cup. And then we're going to add in a half a cup of yogurt for this. So a nice like full fat yogurt, whole milk yogurt. I prefer because it makes it a little bit more tender. But you can definitely use a plain yogurt. I try to skip the Greek yogurt because it's a little too stiff for this and it's not quite as soft. So I want about a half a cup, which I'm just going to eyeball in here to be right where I need it. A couple spoonfuls. And that should be just about right. Get this over here. And then we're going to mix these together. I'm going to use my dough whisk to kind of incorporate my liquid ingredients together. Then we'll add in our baking powder, baking soda, and salt.
Do you have a question? Do you have a cookbook?
I am in the process of making a cookbook right now. So we're hoping to have it out, at least a digital copy out by the end of the month. And then a hardback, paper copy a couple weeks later once it goes through all that kind of final editing there. But I've been working really hard. My husband's been helping me with a lot of the editing and kind of getting it all pretty, make sure it's nice. But yes, we are in the process of working on there. But right now we do post all of our lives. So you're always able to watch and recook along with us. And one thing that's kind of cool about our cookbook is we're actually putting a QR code in there so you can scan and you can go directly to a live of where I'm making that dish on there. Okay, we've got this wet base mixed up. Now we're going to add in our baking soda, our baking powder, and our salt. So I'm going to do 1.5 teaspoons of salt, which is the same as half a tablespoon. We're going to add in 2 teaspoons of baking powder. So 1, 2, and then a half a teaspoon of baking soda. And then once we get those mixed up, you're going to notice the base of this will start to get nice and fluffy. And it's always the fun thing. And this was what makes the naan just so pillowy soft. It's a very moist type of flatbread, but I absolutely love it. I'm going to do a stuffed naan today with prosciutto and mozzarella cheese and some spinach. Kind of go in there. It'll be yummy. Here we go. So you can see it's just that baking soda and baking powder are reacting with the discard and this sour cream, and it's making it nice and fluffy. We're going to add in 3 cups of all-purpose flour, and then we'll kind of mix it together until it comes together nicely, and then we'll let it sit and hydrate while we work on our soup.
Do you know what you're making for dinner yet?
I do not know what I'm making for dinner. I'm thinking about it. I know I'm going to bake up a sourdough loaf for certain, but I'm not 100% sure what I'm making. I've kind of don't have a game plan yet today. I just kind of figured out what I was making for lunch. Although my son has been requesting some acorn squash. So I think I will roast up an acorn. I have 1 acorn squash and he really wants it. So I'm definitely going to roast up an acorn squash with it and then make some sourdough. But not sure what else on there. Be delicious. But that's about as far as I know. Okay, let's get this mixed up. I'm going to mix it until it's just barely kind of incorporated, and then we'll flip it out on the counter and give it a good knead. Your dough should have a slight kind of tack to it, but it shouldn't be so sticky that you can't work with it. If it is very sticky, just add a little bit more flour. So I'm going to pull this all off, and then we'll knead it together. And then it's just going to sit and hydrate. Which means that flour is going to soak up that liquid in there, which will give it a better elasticity when I want to roll it out. We're done with our dough whisk. So give it a couple good smushes together, and then we'll flip it out. And this, I will say, is probably one of are my kids' favorites. We just love naan. And doing it not just in one way, but lots of different ways, stuffed. Sometimes I do the really big ones. We'll do it, or I'll make like a lamb burger and I can do naan kind of patties or little naan for the buns of it. So just doing it differently and changing it up, but you have your same base recipe makes it really nice. I'm going to add just a little pinch more of flour in here just because it's got a little bit of stick and I want it to come out on there. And it depends with your sourdough discard. Sometimes, depending on how long between feedings, it's going to be a little bit more liquidy than if you've just fed it up. So mine had gone this is about day 3 between the feedings, so I need to feed it up. And it's more liquidy today because it's eaten up all the flour pretty much. Okay. We're going to knead the naan and then we'll let it sit and hydrate. But enough to where you've got a little bit of a tack to it. But if it's really sticking to your hands, just add like a little bit of tablespoon or 2 more of flour. Doesn't take a lot to get rid of that tackiness. Couple good kneads. There we go. Kind of rolling up all that loose flour in here. And then just kind of shape it into a little ball. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to cover it with some plastic wrap. That way it will be, keeps the outside moist, and then it'll allow us to, hydrate a little bit nicer for it. There we go. And just put it around there like that. You don't need to completely wrap it up, but just on top here. Okay, I'm gonna give my hands a quick wash. And then we'll get ready for our next part here. And then we'll make up our frosting. I've got a little bit of vanilla on the counter there that we'll wipe up when we make our frosting there. And I was making sure not to knead it into the vanilla because we don't want vanilla in our naan. It wouldn't taste too good. Okay, for our soup, I'm going to saute up some onions, and then we'll add in some garlic, and then we'll add in our butternut squash. But it's a really simple soup, so we'll give it a good drizzle of olive oil here. And I've got 1 big onion here. Now, I have a big butternut squash, but we're not going to use it all. A little bit of butternut squash goes a long way for making this soup. And again, I'm making, a nice kind of lunchtime serving because this is more for my parents and us versus the kids. We went to a jump house this morning, our little jump place, and we had to eat at the jump place because they had pizza. So we had pizza. There was pizza and loaded fries and churros, all the things that a kid could want. Oh, and boneless wings. So I let them eat there. And I was like, okay. But I was like, I want soup because we went from having just this really nice and warm weather to waking up and it was like 45 degrees. And I'm like, oh, it's been in like the 60s and 70s the last week. You can't trick me like that. So let's get these cooking up here. And then we'll let that saute for just a few minutes, get that caramelization out on the onions, which will add a nice flavor to our soup because we're going to blend this soup up. So you don't have to mince these super fine, but just enough to really bring out those flavors. There we go. And then I'm all out of my freshly peeled garlic. So unfortunately, I have to do the manual labor, which is my least favorite thing to do. Let's get these guys out, and then we'll mince them up so we can saute them. There we go. I always have a couple, pieces of garlic, that are that are unpeeled in my fridge when I run out because I love garlic. My just least favorite thing is when you have to peel it yourself is, yeah, they're just a little difficult. Whew. These must not be tearless onions because they're about to get me, which means the cameraman will be crying in a few minutes because if they're getting me, they're going to get him. That's one thing. So I want to say, gosh, it's been like over a decade or so, but I got LASIK surgery because at the time I was still teaching and I was working with little kids and little kids with disabilities, and glasses were just impractical because they always pulled them off. So I was like, oh, I got to get LASIK, that way I can go around. But it has made my eyes more sensitive to like onions and bright lights. Those both get me. Let's get this little skin off, and then we'll have I think I've got a few more left in here, and then we'll get them minced up. Here we go. Whew. Definitely going to get me here. All right, let's mince up our garlic here, and then we'll toss it in with our onions, and then we'll get our butternut squash or diced up, peeled and diced up to add in there. Now, I don't have to mince this up super small because we are going to be pureeing this soup. So even if I leave it a little bit bigger, it will get nice and smooth once it goes into the blender. Okay. Let those sit on top. I'll mix them in just a second, but we want those base onions to kind of get a base at it. I'm not going to use up all of my butternut squash. I'll save part of it for another meal. But what I will do is I'm going to just chop off. We'll leave this part for another day because that's the harder part. So future me will have to deal with peeling that one. And then we're going to get this guy going. For this, I find that it is just easier to use your knife and just kind of peel along the side just like this for it. So just, cut your top and bottom off so you have a nice level surface to do it. And then you can just kind of cut and peel along and try to get as close to it as possible. But you want to get this waxy skin off. They typically, when you get your squash, a lot of times they wax them in the store to preserve them longer. So you definitely need to get it off. There we go. And then we'll cube this up into small pieces and we'll let that saute here in just a second. Nice thing about butternut squash soup is it actually gets pretty tender pretty quick. And a little bit can go a long way to giving you a nice kind of rich soup. Here.
You have a question? How do you store the other half of it in the meantime?
So I will put it either in a Ziploc baggie or cover it with plastic wrap over that top part to keep it nice and protected, and then in the fridge. So once you cut into it, you kind of need to refrigerate it so that it doesn't get bacteria or grow mold. And if you want to, you could always cut it up all the way doing it, but I like to save that for future work. Okay. We're going to first cut our little kind of discs, and then we'll cube them up. And I try not to make them too thick again because I want these to kind of saute up pretty quickly and get tender faster. But even once you start to slice them up, you're like, it already spreads out a lot more than you think. It's like potatoes. I always say a few potatoes can carry you a long way. Now, butternut squash soup is a great squash for soups because it is such a smooth blend on it. It's not as thick and fibrous as, say, a sweet potato or an acorn squash, pumpkin, even the buttercup squash. This one's more delicate, smoother on it. So it does make for a really lovely bisque. get these guys diced up. And the nice thing is I always think people feel like, oh, cutting up the squash themselves, they think it's daunting or it's a lot of work. It takes you maybe an extra 5 minutes max versus paying the $5 extra for them to cut it up for you at the store. I'd rather keep the $5 and get Starbucks versus, having them cut up. Plus, it saves the squash when it's still in its, wax skin like that. It will stay on your counter. You can have it for weeks before it goes bad because it's just kind of like a root vegetable. It doesn't spoil as easily, but once you've chopped it up, you've got to use it within a couple of days or it will mold on the outside. Okay. All right, we've got our onions and our garlic has a nice kind of caramelization forming here. I'm going to turn my heat down to just around a 6, and then we're going to drop in our squash, and we're going to let that saute for a few minutes, and then we'll add in some spices and then our broth, and then we'll let that simmer until it's nice and tender and ready to be pureed. Get that last little piece in here. There we go. Kind of coat it up. There, and this is going to be for our soup. And again, you can roast this in the oven if you wanted to, but I find a nice saute works wonderful to add it as well.
So far, what's in the pot?
So far, we've got onions, olive oil, garlic, and now our butternut squash. So pretty simple soup. We're going to add in some spices in a little bit, and then a little splash of cream for that kind of final base of it. Okay. While we're letting these saute, let's get to making our frosting for our, what did I put? There's my bowl. I was like, where did I put my bowl? Our frosting for our banana bars. That way it can kind of sit and we can whip it up here. So we're going to do, I like my cream cheese frosting to be more of an equal parts cream cheese and butter, just because I like more of that butter flavor in it versus heavily on the cream cheese. So we're going to use a cup of butter and then a cup of cream cheese. We'll whip that together. We'll add in some vanilla and then some powdered sugar for this. So 2 sticks of butter equals a cup. Let's grab a spoon. Let's check my timing. Still get good timing on everything. And then we're going to add in a cup of our cream cheese here. See, I've been to Costco recently, so I've got my mega tub, which tells me I need to make bagels soon. And then I'm just going to eyeball what my cup looks like. Essentially, I want it to be about equal parts. It's not an exact measurement, but that should be pretty close to it. Slide this guy over here. And what we're going to do is we're going to cream our butter and our powdered sugar together. Get these guys in here. And make sure your butter is soft so that it creams together easily. Same with your cream cheese. And it should get nice and light and mix it together well. This way, when we mix in our sugar in a little bit, they'll be equally mixed in. Yeah. Okay. So we've got a good base here. I'm going to give my soup a little bit of a stir. And then we'll get our sugar mixed in here in just a second. Okay, now I'm going to add in some spices to bring in those flavors. We're keeping it fairly simple today. We're going to use oregano, sage, some onion powder, garlic, salt, and then we'll have vegetable bouillon, but more of an herby-based butternut squash soup to kind of go with our stuffed naan that we're going to do. I'm going to do about 1.5 teaspoons of oregano because I really love oregano, and it's a pretty mild spice. I'm going to do about 1 teaspoon of rubbed sage. You could definitely use fresh sage. You'd probably want to use about 2 teaspoons of fresh sage minced up. Now, sage has a nice earthy flavor to it, which pairs really well with the squash. I'm going to do about, I'm going to say like a half a tablespoon of onion powder. A couple shakes of garlic salt, around a teaspoon or so. And then, I forgot we're also going to do black pepper. We're going to add in about a half teaspoon of black pepper. We got our spices here. We'll give this a nice kind of coat up, and that way we can get them heating up and get a little bit of that direct heat on our spices. That will allow their flavors to kind of pop out a little bit more. Then we'll add in our liquid, but we want them to kind of get a little drive up first. Here we go. Okay, let's get our frosting going. We need our powdered sugar, which that's flour. Here's the powdered sugar. I'm going to add in a little bit of the powdered sugar first, then I'll add in the vanilla. If you try to put the vanilla right in with the butter and the cream cheese, it will bounce around. It won't mix in quite as well, just because, butter is kind of like, that oily base. So we're going to use up to 4 cups of powdered sugar in here. I'm going to start off with I'm putting in about 2 right now. We'll mix it in, add our vanilla, and we'll mix it in a little bit more. I don't like to dump all of the powdered sugar in at one time. Otherwise, when you go to mix it, poof, powdered sugar everywhere. You could also do this in a stand mixer as well with like a whisk attachment. Makes it a little bit easier, but I had my hand mixer out, so no need to get a little extra work. Okay. We've got this just kind of mixed in here. Let's go check on our cake and our banana bar base. We'll give it a tap, see if it's ready. It should be because it's not a super thick, but I always like to make sure, just in case. Looking pretty good so far. We've got, you know what? I'm going to give it maybe 3 more minutes. We've got a little one, but I'm going to rotate my pan, and then we'll put it back in there. You can always put like a toothpick in or something like that. I just kind of give it a tap, and if it feels a little jiggly, then you add it in there. You just never know how long you held the door open when you put it in, how much heat it escaped, or if your oven runs a little higher or lower. So I always make sure, I set my time for my minimum cook time, and then from there I kind of judge it on there, because you can always fix underbaked, by cooking it longer. But if you overbake it, well, and then you got a dry mess that's not going to be as good. We're going to add in about a cup of our water here, which we'll be using some vegetable bouillon. But I'm going to add this in, and then we're going to kind of scrape off around the edges, make sure we get all of those spices in here. Kind of heat that up, and then we'll add in some more. But I just do a little by little. It allows the liquid to heat up, as well as kind of judges exactly how much you want to have in there. Now with this, I like to say you add right around enough to cover up the squash with liquid, which is going to be around 4 cups for it. But again, you kind of are using a butternut squash, and so you're not using cup measurements of it, so you kind of have to adjust based on how much squash your piece of vegetable yielded. Okay. Push all of these onions down. Now, the thing is, you don't want to add too much liquid, or you'll have a thin soup. Nobody wants a thin one, because butternut squash doesn't hold quite as much in it as, say, a liquid as like a sweet potato does. You can blend it a lot more. Okay, we'll let this do a little bit more. So they're all completely covered with the water, kind of rising up. So I use about, I'm going to say, 3 3/4 of a cup of water in here. I'm going to use a little bit of cream, so I don't want to add too much. And then we're going to add in a nice big heaping spoonful of vegetable bouillon. You could also use chicken bouillon as well. Those would be the two that I would use. Beef kind of has a stronger flavor that won't match these as nicely. We want a heaping spoonful. This is going to add the saltiness to our soup as well, so we shouldn't need to add any extra salt. We'll mix this in, and then we'll let it come to a nice kind of simmer. Once the squash is tender, about 5 to 10 minutes, then it will be ready to, blend up. While we're almost done with that, let me grab my griddle pan out for our naan so that we can start heating this up and allow it to kind of cook up here. I'm going to let it start heating up at around a 4. Okay, let's add in our vanilla. We need about, a teaspoon and a half of vanilla. So I'm going to add in a little cup and a half full of this. Let's go grab our cake, our banana bar base cake out of the oven, since it should be good now. On here. Okay. Give this a nice little tap. Beautiful. Nice firmness to it.
Oh yeah, what type of bouillon did you use?
I used vegetable bouillon for this, but you could also use chicken bouillon. Turn off my oven here. So here is our beautiful banana bars. Let me actually grab a trivet to put this on. I'll let it sit in the pan for a few minutes, then we will move it off of the pan so it can continue to cool. Because again, we don't want to frost this until it has cooled down for at least 10 minutes, or that frosting will kind of melt off. Okay, let's get the vanilla whipped in. So we've got about a teaspoon and a half of vanilla. And so far in here, we've got a cup of butter with a cup of cream cheese. And then and 2 cups of powdered sugar. And then we'll add in some more. Just whipping it around because we want it to have a nice smooth consistency. Now let's add in a little bit more powdered sugar. Now don't go too heavy on the powdered sugar because again, I don't want it to be super, super sweet. Okay, we'll mix those in, and that will be our nice kind of cream cheese frosting to go on top of our banana bars. And it is just like so good. Get these mixed in. Once we've kind of got that base in there where you don't have to worry about the powdered sugar flying around, and we can increase the speed of it. But start low if you're going to use a hand mixer, and then increase. There we go. Lovely. Okay. We'll let it sit for a little bit, and then I'll whip it some more until we get a nice smooth texture for it. Okay, while we're whipping there or waiting, I'm going to clean this area just a little bit up so we don't have any powdered sugar go on our naan. And then we are going to roll out our naan, stuff it with some prosciutto and some mozzarella cheese and a little bit of spinach to make our little stuffed naan to go with our soup here. But you don't want any powdered sugar on it. You don't want a sweet naan. Nice and savory. And then I'm going to dry this up because we don't want our counter to be wet when we roll out our naan. Otherwise, it will stick to it. And I have my skillet warming up. We're going to cook our naan on a dry skillet, so no need to put oil or butter. Before we roll that out, let's get our soup a little stir here. Here we go. And I can feel it's already starting to get nice and tender. I'm going to give a little quick taste, see if we need to add anything else to it while it's kind of simmering. I want this flavor to be a bit stronger because once we puree up the squash into it. That's going to dull it out a little bit. And we're going to be adding a little bit of cream. Perfect. So good for now. Let me grab my little cutter and a rolling pin for this. And then we'll get our naan going up. So what I like to do when I do stuffed naan, I like to make 2 really big ones. So I'm going to cut it into 4 pieces and then kind of roll out a bottom one and a top one and then kind of put it together.
The chat needs to know why only one braid then.
So my kids asked, they begged, they're like, can we go to a trampoline park over spring break? So I said yes, but I wanted to get my workout in before we went to the trampoline park, because if I don't get it in by like noon, my full workout, it just doesn't happen because I make so many excuses to make it not happen. So we kind of got in, and when I work out, I like to have one braid because it pulls my hair back out of my face versus if I'm doing 2 and I'm like moving there, I'm like whipping myself in the face with my braids. So I've got one braid in there since I finished up my workout, and I literally like changed shoes, and then we went to the trampoline park for like 2 hours. And then I came home and I was like, oh, I got to prep up and get food going so that, we can get some in. They ate at the little ones, and then pretty much all ate at the trampoline park. So this is for the grown-ups. Although I'm not going to lie, I did steal some loaded fries and a churro because it was so good. Concession stand food gets you every time. Okay, we've got our kind of bottom one. Now, when you're rolling out for stuffed naan, roll it out thinner than you would for a regular naan, simply because we're going to be putting 2 of them together, and you don't want it super thick. So I've divided my dough up into 4 because this is going to make one big naan. It's almost kind of like a pizza that will go kind of fill over the top of it for it. So we're going to move this right over here. And then we're going to roll out our second one. I just need an extra space for it because if I try to keep it.
You're going to make 2.
Yes, 2 big ones. So we'll have a top and a bottom. So I've cut it up into 4 pieces, but this will be the top and the bottom. So it will be 2 big naan. I'm sure.
When you get a moment, can you go over everything that's in the soup?
Yes. So for our soup, let me give it a quick stir. And I'm going to turn it down now that we've got a nice little simmer on it. We've got onions, garlic, butternut squash soup, vegetable bouillon, and then our seasonings are oregano, sage, onion powder, garlic, salt, and black pepper. So just a really savory kind of more of a mild butternut squash soup. I feel like butternut squash is something that you can season up so many different ways, and I make it so many different ways. But I was kind of having it match the flavor profile of my stuffed naan, which is going to have prosciutto and mozzarella and some spinach in it. Now, the trick is to roll out your 2 pieces of naan here in roughly the same size. And I will tell you, mine are never the same size. I'll look and I'll be like, oh, these are about the same. And my top one is always smaller than my bottom one. It's like I do a great job on the bottom, not so much on the top. And then we're going to don't want it to stick to the pan either. There we go. See, way smaller. And then we'll get our cheese on here, our prosciutto, a little bit of spinach. You could also, I was like, oh, if I had some, pesto, you could put a little bit of pesto inside, would be delicious as well. You can change it up. Sometimes I'll do like lamb and sauteed onions. You can do like a pizza stuffed naan. There's just a lot of different flavors you can add in here because this base is just a really simple base. It's got a great light flavor to it. And it can go with so many different cuisines. Got some mozzarella. I've got a whole nother block if I need it. Prosciutto. Let me grab my cheese grater. Must still be in the dishwasher from last night. Let me grab it out to clean it up. Got to unload. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to grate some cheese on it. I don't go too heavy with it. You don't want this filling to be super thick on the inside because then the naan won't steam up quite as nicely, kind of cooking up on there. So, and I'll add a little bit more, but we're going to add our first base layer right here. And then I have some prosciutto.
Any dinner ideas yet?
Not really. I know I'm going to bake up a sourdough, and I have one acorn squash that my son has asked me to cook up because he loves acorn squash. So those are the two things that I know that will be on the dinner menu tonight. But outside of that, I have no idea. Okay. We've got our prosciutto here. We're going to do a couple pieces in there. And don't worry if it tears when you're coming off. And we'll just kind of place it in here. And prosciutto is a really lovely meat to go in here because it's a thin meat. So you don't have to worry about it creating too much bulk. And it's nice and salty, so it has a great flavor.
When you make acorn squash, do you make it sweet or savory?
I make it sweet. That is like my, I typically am always like the savory girl who likes things nice and savory. But for my acorn squash, I do make it sweet. I do a little bit of brown sugar, butter, and a pinch of garlic salt. So there's a little bit of savory in there, but that's kind of the base for it. Add a few leaves of spinach, baby spinach in here. I'm going to take off some of the little stalky parts of it just because it will be a little bit nicer. And then I'm just going to grate the remaining bit of this mozzarella cheese over the top. Again, you don't need a whole lot because it's not a pizza or a calzone, so you don't need, ample amounts, but just enough to hold it together. And then I'm going to do a light sprinkle of garlic salt inside. Just a light one. And then we're going to put our top layer on here, kind of match it up as best as possible. Tuck any of those insides in. And then we'll kind of roll over it with our rolling pin to kind of make them go together. Don't seal off the edges until you've rolled them. Otherwise, you'll create a bubble in there. So kind of start from the inside and then roll it out. And then we'll kind of seal it off to have our stuffed naan here. There we go. And you see this, it's quite large. So one of these is really good enough to feed like 3 to 4 people. And now we're going to put our stuffed naan on our skillet that we've had warming up here. And I have it on about a 4. Stretch it out. And then we're going to let it kind of cook up and on there. Okay, I'm going to flip out my cake now so that it has a chance to cool on the other side for this. And then we start getting ready to kind of blend up. So the nice thing about cooking it in parchment paper like this is it's really easy to transfer out of here. And your baking sheet is practically clean for it. Now, we're going to flip it over. That way I can peel off my parchment paper fairly easily. And you'll have a slightly flatter surface. This is going to allow it to cool now much quicker for it. But you want to put it on, whether you're finishing thing put on here for it. But this is our banana bread bars made with, we have sour cream in there, bananas, brown sugar, white sugar, eggs, vanilla, lots of vanilla. It's a slightly sweeter than a banana bread. It's more moist than a banana bread, but it is delicious. And then we're going to put our cream cheese frosting on it here, but we're going to let that cool off now. Getting it out here, that's going to allow it to cool off significantly faster. Let's do another whip up on our cream cheese frosting here. Here we go. And get any of those kind of chunks out from it. Here.
Is there any discard in the banana bar?
No, this is just a straight up good old sour cream cake base for it. This recipe I've had since like 2008. It was just one of those ones that I went and I spent like a whole summer with my older sister, and I kind of like watched her kids. She had young kids, and I was in college, and that was one of the things that was happening in Iowa that summer was banana bars. And I think we made banana bars and broccoli salad every single week of that summer. It was so good. And these bars I actually love to keep in the refrigerator because with the cold cream cheese frosting on the top, they're so good. I'm going to give one more whip up here, but let's get our soup kind of moving to the next stage, and then we'll do that last final whip up on here. And then we're going to get ready to flip our naan, and then we'll spread our frosting over our bars, which is so good. Now you can always keep your bars in your pan and just frost them in the pan doing that, but I like to let them this way and then I can cut them up here. Okay, let me grab a fork and a different spoon. This is my tasting spoon. And you'll just know when your squash is ready is just pull up a big piece, and if your fork can go through it just like that, nice and smooth, that means it's ready to puree. Now, I like to add a splash of cream into, now you don't necessarily need to if you don't want to, because butternut squash is already very creamy, but I just like a little bit, like a fourth of a cup. You don't need a whole lot to get you that nice extra creaminess to it. Give it a good mix around, and then we're going to puree it, and then we'll add it right back in here for that to kind of do our final simmer. So I'm going to turn it down nice and low. I'm going to grab a ladle, and then let me grab a spatula to check my stuffed naan here. See how it's going? Pretty good. I'm going to give it a good rotation. This takes up my whole griddle pan, so it takes a little bit longer to cook up than if you're doing individual ones. Loki boy. He's, of course, sees all the people out there walking because it's a nice spring day here. It's cold, but the sun is shining. It was one of those things as we were driving, they're like, it's so cold today, but it's the sunniest day it's been in a while. And I was like, I know, but it is definitely the coldest day.
You have a question, why puree this soup?
Because it will make it a nice smooth texture to it. So it gives it more of a bisque for the texture base for it. Butternut squash soup is such a tender squash that it really does well when you puree it up, and to make that kind of texture to it, a thicker, creamier texture for it. Now you could definitely leave it if you wanted to, but it gives you just a smoother, more robust kind of flavor and everything. Now there are some soups that I'll use butternut squash cubed up into it, like a nice kind of Tuscan soup where I put the squash in. But for this one, because it's more of a butternut squash bisque, we're going to puree it. Now you could use an immersion blender as well. I love my Vitamix because it makes it really smooth and no time. And to be honest, I've gone through a couple of immersion blenders because I just tend to overblend and break them. So this always seems to make it through. And I recommend, if you do get an immersion blender one, don't get a battery powered one. Get one a corded one. Those last longer. Here we go. Last little bit into this. I'm going to turn this off while we wait. We'll put this on here to blend up in our mixer or our blender here. Make sure you put your lid on. And then just real quick before I blend it, I want to just make sure we're not ready because we're ready. Okay, this is moment of truth. Beautiful. Flip it over. We've got our nice golden area on this side. Now we're going to cook up the other side. The other side cooks up a little bit faster than the first side because your griddle pan is nice and is a little bit hotter. Okay, let me turn this guy on. And then I'm going to, my Vitamix has a hot soup setting. So we're going to do that. It starts off in a lower blend and then it makes it nice and fast. It takes about 30 seconds to a minute to blend it up, but it makes it nice and smooth and it's really easy. And they're pretty easy to wash up and clean. So, here. That's all you need. It doesn't take long. That's why I said it takes a fraction of time of your immersion blender and it makes it, again, a smoother texture to it. Okay, we're going to add this right back into our pan. And you can see it's going to have a nice thicker texture to it. So more of a bisque, which is lovely. And we pureed up all those onion, those bits of garlic and stuff. And that's really going to infuse more into the soup for it. But just look how beautiful that is. Just a nice kind of wonderful, rich texture to it. So lovely, delicious, and easy for it. And I only added about a 4th cup of cream, but you can completely use no cream and you'll still have this wonderful, smooth texture for your bisque. Okay, let's get our last whip up here on our frosting for it. And then I'm gonna do it nice and high. And we're gonna get this ready to go on our cake. Beautiful. Okay, I'll do a quick little taste. Delicious. It's very mildly sweet. You could definitely add more, but I like mine more mild and instead of over the top.
Yeah, but are these recipes going to be in the cookbook?
They will definitely be in the cookbook. Well, I know my naan. I know the banana bars. I was actually editing this page today of our cookbook, which has made me like, oh, I have some ripe bananas. I want banana bars because I haven't made them in a while. I've made banana donuts and banana muffins, but I haven't made my classic banana bars, which are such a favorite because they're like banana bread meets cake. So good. Let me grab a little spatula here. We'll spread on our things. We're pretty cool now for it. And this is a really light frosting. Again, if you like your frosting sweeter, you can add more powdered sugar, but I tend to like mine more mildly sweet for it. We're going to add on a nice, start off with our good base here. When you're adding your frosting on, put a bunch on, then spread it over, because if you try to spread it on the top, you're going to pull that top crumb off. So get a good amount for it. On here, beautiful. And you could easily make this into a cake if you wanted to use it as a cake because it has that nice sweetness for it. But I love these. And then I chill these. I keep them in the fridge chilled, which firms up the frosting. So it's a denser frosting on top for it. Get a good scoop more. And here we go. And this is what the nice thing is. So this original recipe was for like a sheet cake pan where it was really big. And then you had a slightly less thick banana bar, but more thin layer thing. I like a nice big old thick layer of cream cheese frosting on it with this. Beautiful. And then we'll just kind of let it seep over the top of it. But there's our gorgeous banana bars. Let's check this out. We've got our soup ready. This is just about ready. I'm going to grab my cutting board to pop this on so that we can butter it up and then slice it up. Probably. put it on here, and then we'll be ready to serve up our lunch here because it is all ready. Okay. Once you take your thing off, I'm gonna flip it here. I'll put it here. I'm gonna butter this side. I'll flip it over and butter the other side. That way I'm not doing a double flip where it's extra hot here. Use some room temperature butter. This is gonna keep the outside of your naan nice and soft on here. Look at that side. Beautiful. We'll rub it with our butter. Gorgeous. Okay, guys. Since we already have one round of everything done, we can serve up. And that way, for those who are hungry, no more waiting. And I still have room, so I'm going to make, afterwards I'll finish up making my naan, but this makes 2 huge naan, kind of stuffed naan pizzas. Gorgeous. Let me grab these banana bars. So good. So good. Put it right over here. And let me grab, I've got a nice cutting board right here. And we are ready to serve up here. I'm going to cut up my naan into pieces real quick, but I'll get my Parmesan because I love to put Parmesan cheese on top of our soup when we're ready to serve. Okay. So let's cut up our naan here. Just gorgeous. You can see that prosciutto. I'm going to cut this each piece into kind of 6, I should say, because they're so big. But just look, you can see that the cheese is melted in there, and our spinach, I'll see if I can lift it apart so you can see it, but just look how gorgeous that is in there. Let's cut this guy up, and then we're going to get ready to serve up our lunch here. Okay. Let's get ready. For lunch today, we have our creamy butternut squash soup that we seasoned up with onions, garlic, some oregano, rub sage, black pepper, and vegetable bouillon. And then we added in a splash of cream just to get a nice smoothness to it. And then we pureed it until it was nice and smooth. We'll add a little bit of freshly grated Parmesan cheese over the top just to add a little extra touch. And then we're going to serve it with our stuffed naan that we have. This is our homemade sourdough naan stuffed with mozzarella cheese, prosciutto, spinach, and a little bit of garlic salt, which we can dip into our delicious soup. And then for dessert, we'll have a nice slice of our banana bars. So I'm just going to use a spatula here to kind of cut off a nice piece with our cream cheese frosting. They're soft. They're made with 3 bananas, brown sugar, granulated sugar, vanilla, eggs, and sour cream with a nice cream cheese frosting on top. Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe. I try to do live cooking shows every single day, kind of show you what we're making for our family and hopefully teach you guys something along the way. Again, we do upload all of our videos to the link on our page. So if you ever want to recreate any of these recipes at home, you can just go to our page and search for what we made. We've got our butternut squash soup, our stuffed naan, and our banana bars. And you can always watch and cook along with me again. We also have a link to our Amazon storefront that has all of our different cooking gear and gadgets in it. I've got my Vitamix in there, my Dutch ovens, my griddle pan, all the different things that I use in the kitchen I have in there for you guys to check out. But again, thank you so much for joining us here. Don't forget to like and subscribe.